And Jill, we're delighted you could be with us tonight. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Jack. I'm delighted to be here with all of you. I'm going to attempt to share my screen so that you can also see the PowerPoint slides that I'm working from. I have subtitled this presentation, COVID-19 and the Witness of the Church, because I think that although we're going to start with some of the realities, we are going to get into the more hopeful ways that we can witness. So I really look forward to spending that time with you today. I, as Jack mentioned, am a graduate of the Just Faith programs. I graduated in 2009, and the impact on my parish, my parish then, before I moved to Maryland, was quite big. We started an ESL program as a result of being part of Just Faith, and we also re-engaged the parish with a faith-based ecumenical community organizing group that the parish had been involved with a number of years ago, but had lapsed in that membership. And as a result, I was involved then in a campaign, a number of campaigns over several years, involving community listening at the parish and in the neighborhood, working on homelessness and the availability of affordable housing in Washington, D.C., jobs for local people in green jobs, voter registration, making sure that the priorities of low-income people were on the agendas of lawmakers. It was really, I think, connected, though, to the fire that was sparked in the hearts of so many people in the parish as a result of participating in Just Faith. So I have a lot of gratitude for this program, and it's wonderful to be able to share with all of you having that experience as well. So I want to begin by just naming some of the current realities that we're facing today with COVID-19, because that, of course, is the context for this conversation that we're having today. We're in a time in our country where the public conversation has begun to catch up in a way with a lot of things that you and I probably already knew, in part as a result of the wonderful formation and education that Just Faith did in our parishes, but things that we already knew about inequalities and the really broken and flawed structures and institutions that lead to those inequalities. And the opportunity at this time, I think, is to bring that into the public conversation and to see how our faith can really shine a light on some of those issues and can help guide our responses and help us to take a leadership role in doing that. Our faith calls us to ask questions about these realities, and you can see some of those questions that have been on my mind as I have thought about these realities and discussed them with others. But in addition to these questions, I just want to name like a few facts and realities that have really come up strongly and covered by the media recently. So one of those realities is that if you are Black, you are more likely to contract the virus, but you are less likely to be tested or treated. And we all know that's because of historical disadvantages that still persist in unequal access that some communities have to quality health care, to healthy food deserts in many communities. African Americans, and as a result, are more likely to develop some of the health conditions that have been conducive to contracting the virus. At the same time, one recent study that was reported widely in the media just last week showed that there are biases, implicit bias that is leading to African Americans being less likely to be tested or treated or admitted. And so that's resulting in a much higher number of deaths proportionally. Another, thing that has been reported recently, the ability to work from home varies greatly depending on who you are. And again, by race. Only 16% of Hispanic workers and only 19% of Black workers can telework. And it's the higher wage workers that are 6 times more likely to be able to work from home as the lower wage workers. And so we have to ask questions about why that reality is the case. Another reality, workers in agricultural, food services, and the manufacturing sectors are ensuring that all of us have access to the food and the goods that we need while we shelter at home, but they have little recourse to ensure that their own health and safety are protected. I'm sure you've all seen the recent reporting about the lack of worker rights in the meatpacking sector, and that's just one example. I have a friend, in fact, whose family member is an agricultural worker, is a migrant laborer in the fields. She was telling me how her relative had coworkers who were experiencing symptoms associated with coronavirus and were told that they needed to come to work. And her relative is now in fear of being infected herself. Another reality, educational disparities are widening. Kids that are in communities that don't have reliable internet in low-income districts are at a serious disadvantage in the virtual learning reality. Kids in low-income communities are also more likely to be in households where the caretakers maybe cannot telework because they are still required to report to their jobs, and then those kids don't have the assistance with schoolworks. And so there's been a lot of talk, and I think it's very good, about how this is bringing to light some of the systemic inequalities in our education systems depending on what your zip code is. Another reality, unemployment is growing, but many families were already vulnerable. As unemployment grows, families nationwide are struggling to pay rent, and this is unsurprising since over 18 million households pay over 50% of their income in order to pay for their housing. And there has been a severe shortage of affordable housing in our country for a number of years. If you live in any sort of urban area, you've probably heard a lot about that and even experienced that. Wages have not kept up with the cost of living increases, and families are the ones who are feeling the burden. Some communities have been largely forgotten. Only recently has national attention been drawn to the plight of Native Americans, for example. Native American communities are being severely impacted by COVID-19. And again, it's some of those historical structural realities that persist today that are causing that vulnerability. And out of public sight, people who are incarcerated and people who are detained are housed in conditions where social distancing simply isn't possible. And so infection can then spread quite rapidly. And then turning away from the United States, we can also look at the global realities. I heard a statistic the other day from Johns Hopkins University that the United States has 85 million more critical care beds than the country of Kenya. South Sudan has a total of exactly 4 ventilators in the entire country. 2 billion workers in the informal economic work in the informal sector in the global sphere, and they have experienced a 60% reduction in their income as a result of coronavirus. Women are particularly susceptible. Their forms of employment are more tenuous, and they're also often the caretakers of their household. In addition, another global factor is that remittances, which is the money that is sent back home by immigrants who are working abroad, those remittances have decreased by a quarter. Kids are not in school globally, like they are not as well here in the US, but they don't have the virtual access in many poor countries that we do here. And so learning is not even taking place at all in some of those places. So this is a lot of really dire realities that I'm sort of starting out by sharing. And the question is, what are we called to do with all of this? It can feel really overwhelming, especially as we're asked to remain in our homes, which is absolutely the best for public safety, but it's also really difficult in terms of our need for community as people of faith and as part of the body of Christ. And so I'm going to turn from my Catholic tradition to Pope Francis, who often offers words of wisdom that can be really helpful in guiding our perspective on these things. This is a quote from The Joy of the Gospel, Evangelii Gaudium, and he says that in a culture that paradoxically suffers from anonymity, but at the same time is obsessed with the details of other people's lives, that we must make present the fragrance of Christ's closeness and his personal gaze. He says that the church has to initiate everyone into this art of accompaniment, which teaches us to remove our sandals before the sacred ground of the other. And so, I began reflecting on this this excerpt from Joy of the Gospel after the homilist at my multicultural parish that I belong to in Maryland. This past Sunday, I was attending the virtual Mass in Spanish, and the homilist was reflecting on the call to acercarse, to draw oneself near, to bring oneself closer. And in Spanish, that's a reflexive verb with the se. And it is so much more appropriate and meaningful to me than the English word of being close or becoming near, because it's bring yourself close, bring oneself near. Physical closeness is not possible right now, but spiritual closeness is. Spiritual accompaniment is very possible. And so that real action that we're called to take, to heal, to liberate, to encourage growth, that is very, very possible for us as people of faith, especially as we think about the broken and oppressive structures that have led to such disparate impacts within our U.S. community and our global community as well. I used this reflection with my team this week at my workplace, and questions that we reflected on. How do you sense that the fragrance of Christ's closeness is at this time near you? What have you been doing, or what could you be doing to become more sensitive, more aware of that closeness? As a disciple, how have you been called to channel the compassionate gaze of Christ in your own community? What does accompaniment mean when it cannot be done physically? And where and how is Christ calling you to heal, to liberate, to grow, and to bring growth to your community, even when there is so much brokenness around us? We're in the Easter season right now, but I don't know about you, sometimes for me, it feels like we're in an extended Holy Saturday, like we're just waiting outside the tomb. And yet we're called to be an Easter people. We're people of faith. And so our question is, what can we do? What does accompaniment look like in this moment, right now? This image of kind of a sunrise is something that I think is very appropriate to think about. What does accompaniment look like when we're aware that there are such imperfections in the systems and the structures and the laws and the policies that we all live within, and how can we be part of a sunrise, of a new moment? Of bringing the light of our faith to shine on all that is around us, and to help form some of those new ways of looking at things as a society. So again, I want to turn one more time to Pope Francis. I promise this is the last quote that I've included in the presentation. But and I'm not going to read this one, but really I just want to get at Pope Francis as he suggests, how we're called to accompany. He really focuses in on two ways that we can do that. There's the call to look at those structural causes of poverty, and then there's that call to participate in the small daily acts of solidarity that can meet the real needs of those that we encounter. And so we're going to look a little bit at these pieces. So just first, thinking about the small daily acts of solidarity, I'm going to mention that one first because it's easier. It's easy to see a lonely neighbor, an elderly neighbor that maybe we need to reach out and check in on. For people who are younger and healthy, discerning if you can physically help safely, charitable organizations as they deliver meals, as they provide other essential services. There's ways to serve in virtual means. I know that my town has a phone bank where volunteers can sign up to call vulnerable members of the community to check in on them, to see what their needs are. we can donate, to food banks. My colleagues at Catholic Charities USA tell me that access to food and families not having enough food or the income to buy that food is like the number one problem that they're seeing at their agencies right now. People need food. So those small daily acts of solidarity, we can all discern what the call is. But I want to spend a little bit more time on efforts that are available to us to support that call to address the structural causes of poverty. One very practical action that you can take at this time is to visit this website that I'm showing you right now on this slide, and to find out what community organizations in your area are doing to work for structural change locally. CCHD stands for the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. It is the anti-poverty arm of the U.S. Catholic bishops, and one of the main pieces of CCHD is to provide funding to community organizations all around the country, many of them ecumenical, many of them faith-based, where people from all different denominations come together. Organizations that are led by low-income people, and that's a criterion for receiving funding, is that there has to be the low-income people have to be in leadership of the organization. And they welcome, of course, accompaniment from those who are not low income in their work. And these organizations that are funded by CCHD, which we call CCHD groups, they have been working to address structural injustices in communities long before COVID-19. The lack of access to affordable housing, lack of access to healthcare, food deserts, economic opportunities that respect workers' rights. This is the daily work that CCHD-funded groups do. In my own parish, let me give you an example. Action in Montgomery is a CCHD organization that's in my county, and my parish is a member of it. And they have been a major player in making the voices of low-income people heard in terms of affordable housing in the county. And that's resulted in major money going into an affordable housing trust fund to incentivize the building of affordable housing. They have worked on environmental justice, education issues. My parish worked with AIM to help organize tenants to advocate for their own rights when they were experiencing mold and dilapidated conditions in their apartment complex next to the parish. But many of these groups, like AIM, like the one that I'm talking about, are adapting to respond in a really rapid way to coronavirus and to how it's impacting communities. The group that I'm talking about, that my parish works with, they have pivoted really quickly. Their focus is on, they have created teams that focus on jobs and healthcare and education to strategize about how to get those issues on the radars of lawmakers, as well as the concerns of the most vulnerable residents. They have worked for accountability and transparency on sharing data about infections in workplaces where low-income people are working and in apartment buildings, because that's not easy data to get. They have even, helped to have the county be responsible for distributing masks and food in low-income neighborhoods. And so the results are like really immediate, but you have to have communities of faith working together to magnify their voices and to have those elected officials listen to the needs of low-income people. Another example from another part of the country is an organization called Dallas Area Interfaith. Again, brings together many different religious houses of worship, and they have worked to develop a parish ID program for immigrants. This was done prior to coronavirus. That's been replicated in a lot of other locations. Now, in response to COVID-19, first they started by calling 3,000 families in 2 weeks to ask about their needs and to invite community members to be involved in their response to COVID-19. And then that led to food drops. It led to working with the county judge to place a moratorium on evictions for low-income people. It led to working with the county health department to have acceptance of those parish IDs that they had worked to create months before in order to get access to testing, because you have to have identification in order to get that testing. And for many undocumented persons. They didn't have access otherwise. Now they can get that because of the parish IDs. They got a moratorium on electric shutoffs and a fund to help those affected by COVID-19 to pay their bills. So it's just been really amazing to see these community organizations pivot. There's about 200 of these organizations that receive funding, and you can actually look up to see which ones are in the counties where you live. Give them a call, get involved. Better yet, gather a bunch of people from your parish or your institution, your faith institution, and get involved as well. A second area that I want to talk about, here's some photos, by the way, of some of the work of those CCHD-funded groups and organizations. Some really, really great work happening. Another area that I want to talk about is advocacy, federal advocacy. There is a great need right now because the COVID-19 relief package, the next one, is being considered at this moment in Congress. Just a couple days ago, there was a version in the House, and it's being negotiated, and there will be another version in the Senate. And so right now is a moment where our elected officials really need to hear from us to fix problems with the relief package and to make sure that vulnerable people are really prioritized. So the first area, I have three here. The first area is, prioritizing SNAP benefits. That's Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. And as you know, that is a program that really effectively addresses hunger by delivering resources directly to low-income households to help families keep food on the table. It's also a proven tool that can help boost the economy because you're giving money to families, they're spending those in the community. Every dollar that is spent on SNAP generates, studies have shown, between $1.50 and $1.80 in economic activity. So the return to the local community is very important. The work now is to ensure that in the next relief bill, the maximum SNAP benefit can be increased by 15%. That's the goal that organizations like mine are advocating for. They want to also increase the minimum SNAP benefit amount, which is currently very low, so that people have to receive at least a little bit more to get them through this time. And they want to suspend some recent rules that have been considered by the administration that would actually limit eligibility in the SNAP program. So first action alert. URL is there on prioritizing SNAP benefits. Second, another office within the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops that my office works with is Justice for Immigrants in the Migration Refugee Services branch. And they are also doing action and engaging people of faith in action right now because they are really wanting to see more access for immigrant families, and in particular, people who may not have status, because they are important in our economy and also important for the health of everyone in the country, that they can be included. So, access to testing and treatment for everyone, including immigrant communities, extending work authorization and visa renewal deadlines for refugees and immigrants who are providing and participating in the recovery assistance to the country, and ensuring that even in some cases that immigrant and refugee populations might be eligible for some of the cash assistance that is being received in the packages being considered. And then finally, the area of foreign assistance. And this is really important because, as you heard from earlier, our brothers and sisters around the world are extremely vulnerable right now, often don't have the infrastructure and the health systems in place to be able to care for people who are vulnerable to this virus. And so we really need to ensure that there is foreign assistance available for organizations like Catholic Relief Services, that I'm very proud of as a Catholic. And for those of you that are other denominations, there are similar relief organizations that do work in your name to witness the love of God for all people by caring for those who are vulnerable. And so we have to ensure that the assistance money is there for those organizations to do the important work that they do. And I just heard today that the current draft that is being considered for the next relief package is woefully inadequate in terms of the foreign assistance that may be offered. And so we really need advocacy in that area. Okay, so this is just kind of a brief summary of the 3 areas that we're looking for advocacy on. I want to just spend a minute or two mentioning this concept of finding new models of development. I think a question that we all can think about as people of faith is, how do we come out of COVID-19 with new models so that we don't go back to the same exploitative systems that created this inequality in the first place? How do we do things differently? When we're advocating, when we're working with the community groups, we're seeking new models, new ways of doing things that don't have to lead to such inequality. And so that brings me to my final point, which is something that is coming up very soon, which is Laudato Si Week. Laudato Si is an encyclical, a teaching document that Pope Francis put out 5 years ago. It's the 5th anniversary in 2020, and it is about caring for our common home, the home that we all live in, respecting creation, and recognizing the interconnectedness of all of these things that we care about. The connection, he says, between the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. And so when we talk about new models, it has to include care for creation, including people and the entire world. We're seeing right now, exploitation of workers in the meatpacking plants, exploitation in agricultural workers. We need new models. We need new ways of doing things. There's an international movement that you may have heard of, inspired by what they're calling the economy of Francesco, the economy of communion model. And the idea is that business doesn't have to be anti-worker or anti-environment. We can have modes of operating that lift up both of those things. CCHD, the community groups that I was mentioning before, they are certainly lifting up new models as well. Worker ownership is a model that many of them operate under. Co-ops, green cleaning services led by immigrant women who are co-owners of those businesses. And so how do we help contribute to that conversation about new ways of doing things that we can make progress together as a human family. So individually, at home, there are many ways during Laudato Si Week that we can discern individual choices that we can make with our families. I'm a member of a CSA, a community-supported agriculture group, and we get a box of food that's supporting local farmers. Every week, our goods travel, fewer miles. We get food in a safe way. It's one really practical way that we can kind of support a greener world that also respects workers' rights and is a new way of doing things. So I've given you a lot to think about, a lot of ideas, but I'm going to stop there, and I'm happy to, if there's questions that folks have, I believe that there's a chat function that you can enter those into. I can't see the chat function right now. Maybe if I stop sharing my screen, I'll be able to see that. Let me try that. Okay, I can see the chat now. So yeah, if you have a question or a thought or a comment, please feel free to type that in. I'm not seeing any so far. Okay, great. Good question from Carolyn. She wants to know a little bit more about the Parish ID program that was developed by Dallas Area Interfaith. So basically what a Parish ID is, so when you have persons who don't have status, persons who are undocumented, they often are quite vulnerable. And the Parish ID program basically had the faith communities in Dallas work together with the law enforcement to create a special ID that said, I'm a member of such and such parish. And it gave those persons who had those IDs a certain level of status, even though it wasn't, the legal status in terms of, being in the country, with authorization. But they worked with the law enforcement to accept those parish IDs, so that if somebody, for example, were, asked for identification from a law enforcement officer, they would have that, and then they would be seen as, associated with the parish, and they were able to use that also for access to different, services or benefits, maybe things like to get a library card, other things like that. So the city sort of decided that they were going to accept these IDs because people simply didn't have them because of their status, and it allowed them to be more of a part of the community. And so in this case, with the COVID-19, they were able to work out with the county to accept those parish IDs in order to get testing for coronavirus, which of course was a great public health benefit for everybody, for all of the people to be who potentially were sick to be able to be tested. Okay, great. Good question from someone about whether the bishops are also speaking about these matters that I'm presenting about. Yeah, so I would encourage you to visit the USCCB website, which is www.usccb.org. And if you go under the media, there's a section for press releases. And so you'll see a number of statements that the bishops have put out just in the last couple of months. The most recent one was a statement about coronavirus and how it impacts Native American communities and some of the historical inequalities that have impacted them. There was one just a few days before that about how coronavirus is impacting people disparately of different racial groups and how that is connected to historical systemic injustices. There have been also statements about the various vulnerable communities, especially people in poverty, that we want to ensure have the priority attention in the COVID relief packages. So yes, they've been speaking about all of these things that I've mentioned. They don't get as much attention in the media because they're not super controversial. So I wish they did get more attention, but that simply hasn't always been what appears in the newspaper. So please do go to the website and check it out. You can see all of the statements that have been put out in the last few months. Question, could I say more about how people in their church communities can find out if there are CCHD supported initiatives in their local area? And so that would refer to the community groups that are doing such wonderful work like Dallas Area Interfaith or like Action in Montgomery, which I spoke about at my own parish. So you're going to go to the povertyusa.org website, go to the ACT section, and you will see a link to look on a map. And you can look up and see where there are organizations that are supported by CCHD all around the country. There's over 200 of them on the map, and they have the name of the group, their website, their contact information. So it's pretty easy to find them and to get involved.
Jill, I think we have time for maybe one more question.
Okay. I don't have any more questions on the chat that I'm seeing. I think I've answered all of the ones that have popped up.
Okay, great. Anyone have a last question they'd like to ask Jill? Okay, great. Well, Jill, we thank you for your presentation and really appreciate you taking the time to share with us and share that knowledge. And I'm seeing a button coming up on the chat. Okay, it looks like we do have, not sure that's a question. Okay, we do have one more question, Jill.
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, yeah. So May 24th is going to be a global day of prayer during Laudato Si week, and May 14th, somebody was pointing out, is a day of global prayer for an end to COVID-19. So hopefully we can all participate in that. Are the bishops sending letters to their churches? Is a question here. I'm not sure exactly what that refers to. The bishops are sending letters to elected officials and people in the administration to tell them all of the positions that I've shared. And so that's really helpful. And then they have the action alerts that I pointed to where people can send letters to the elected officials and take action in that way.
Great. Thank you, Jill. We really do appreciate you being with us tonight. And in the next few days, you'll be receiving an email from me and the rest of the Just Faith Ministry staff that includes some of the information from Jill's presentation. So you'll be able to take action on the points that she has outlined for us, which will be wonderful. And it'll also have information about the upcoming events that we have as a part of this series. So thank you again for joining us. And Jack is going to close us with prayer.
May I just invite all of us in a strange way just to thank Jill for her time by clapping in your screen. Jill, that was just outstanding. Thank you so very much. I think it was just what we were hoping for tonight. So we're so grateful for your presence here. I thought I would close with a very, very short prayer by Howard Thurman, who many of you might know was an African-American author, philosopher, theologian, educator, civil rights leader. He was sort of the spiritual guide, many would say, for the civil rights movement, and he was a remarkable spiritual writer, and this is a prayer by him. Listen to the long stillness. New life is stirring. New dreams are on the wing. New hopes are being readied. Humankind is fashioning a new heart. Humankind is forging a new mind. God is at work. This is the season of promise. Amen.